A wise man once said there are lies, damned lies, and then there are lawyers. Mark O'Mara is all three. O'Mara, you'll recall, was the shyster who represented George Mad Dog Zimmerman. I can't really be too angry at O'Mara, though, because the truth is, he wasn't the reason Zimmerman got off the hook. A thoroughly corrupt state's attorney, aided and abetted by a white supremacist media, are to blame. O'Mara was just standing in the right place at the right time. Or was he? I'm sure for a hot second O'Mara thought he'd ride his white supremacist-funded client to glory. With the white supremacist media acting as cheerleaders, he thought for sure he'd be raking in the crowdfunding dough from online keyboard Klansmen wanting to see race killers walk. But white supremacy always winds up shooting itself in the foot. Rather than hit the mother lode, O'Mara's gravy train derailed. George Zimmerman not only lied to the police and the public, but to even his own lawyers, hiding the very money he was supposed to be paying them. Not that this should have come as any surprise to O'Mara. After all, the previous lawyers who were representing Zimmerman dropped him for exactly this same reason. And of course, as I detailed in my video series, The Murder of Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman had been in trouble with the law for years before he murdered Trayvon. And he's remained in trouble ever since, being arrested on a near monthly basis. And even when he's not doing something overtly violent to other people, he's breaking the law in other ways, even going so far as to post revenge porn pics of his current, or rather ex-girlfriend, who got exactly what she deserved because, let's face it, if you get with Zimmerman, it's because you're a white supremacist too. Oh, and did I mention Zimmerman also took the time to make racist remarks about Muslims? Gee, whatever happened to all those white supremacist trolls who said Zimmerman didn't have a racist bone in his worthless body? Zimmerman has burned every moron who was ever dumb enough to support him, and O'Mara was no exception. O'Mara got into some hot water with the Florida Bar Ethics Board for his handling of the blood money Zimmerman got from the keyboard Klansmen. O'Mara, of course, denied all of this, and for once I actually might believe him because, as the jailhouse recordings proved, Zimmerman was pocketing the cash and hiding it. In all likelihood, O'Mara lost money on his racist client. The bastard should have lost a lot more. Having realized that Zimmerman conned him into giving a free legal defense, O'Mara promptly dumped the chump who he used to praise, and he's powerless to do anything because if he tried to sue Zimmerman for the money he's owed, he would be confirming for everyone that he was an idiot who allowed a career criminal and child killer to play him for a fool. O'Mara instead has been forced to put on a brave face, claim pride at having been made a fool of, and try to get whatever PR mileage he could out of this whole mess. For O'Mara, defending George Zimmerman was an expensive lesson in the school of experience. But then, having talked himself into a corner, he ridiculously turns around and says he'd have taken the Zimmerman case again. You can't have it both ways, Mark. You thought you saw some easy white supremacist dollars, but your cash cow turned out to be a snake in the grass, and now you're trying to salvage your reputation and your practice. Which he seems to be doing. With the eager help of the white supremacist media, Mark O'Mara is now being lauded as, get this, a civil rights attorney. Some of them have even gone so far as to call him a well-known civil rights attorney. Because after all, who doesn't think of George Zimmerman when we think of civil rights? The media's pathetic attempt at rebranding O'Mara is doubly stupid when you consider that that's not what they were calling him 3 years ago, and it's damn sure not what he was calling himself when he was defending his murderous client. He denied the Zimmerman case having anything to do with civil rights at all. Mark O'Mara has done an about-face and is now representing the victims of police violence. Today, it's been announced, O'Mara successfully represented the family of Samuel DuBose, who was murdered by a Cincinnati University race soldier disguised as a cop. The settlement was for $5 million, which, under a typical contingency arrangement, means O'Mara walked away with a cool $1.6 million. Not bad for a couple months' work, And unlike Zimmerman, he didn't have to sacrifice his reputation or his finances. But it's the non-monetary terms of the settlement that are supposed to give him his new identity as a civil rights crusader. O'Mara negotiated that the university has to give free undergraduate tuition to Mr. Dubos's 12 children, issue an apology to them, and provide a memorial on campus commemorating Mr. Dubos. The Dubos family will also be involved in a community advisory committee on police reform. Before I go any further, I think black attorneys ought to take note of all this. This is why you see the majority of black victims of police violence getting white representation. Benjamin Crump and his other mush-mouthed ilk don't get results. More than that, they push for a quickie settlement, like Laquan McDonald's family did, and then leave it at that. Mark O'Mara worked the case to squeeze every goodie he could out of the university. I say that not to praise him, but to point out a fact. He understood that the cash settlement was a given. To rehabilitate his own reputation, he'd have to deliver more than that, and he did. He will be able to use Samuel Dubos's black children as his law firm's mascots. Never mind the fact that this bastard allowed a black child little older than Samuel Dubos's children to be murdered with impunity and then praised the walking piece of garbage who did it. Mark O'Mara understands the nature of the game being played. That's my point. As did Robert Kardashian, who represented O.J. Simpson. White lawyers don't just look for a photo op. They look to see how a high-profile case can position them in the legal community as a whole. O'Mara positioned himself horribly with George Zimmerman, but this time he positioned himself just right. To O'Mara, it was the non-monetary details of the settlement that mattered, because he will now use them as bragging rights from here to eternity. Whenever he gets called out on Zimmerman, you can bet he'll immediately drag this one settlement out of the woodwork. It's his shield against any and all criticism. These are his so-called civil rights credentials, and the white media will play right along with it. After all, they look just as stupid as O'Mara did for taking Zimmerman's side. But don't go fooling yourself into ever thinking O'Mara suddenly discovered morality and has realized how wrong he was. He's merely trying to reinvent himself. O'Mara is your typical ambulance chaser, a Florida lawyer with too much suntan and too few scruples. He saw the multi-million-dollar lawsuits being awarded to the black victims of people like his former client, and he figured he still had time to leap on board that particular money train. The point of this video is to reinforce that the white media works hand in hand with whites in politics, education, and especially the judiciary. Mark O'Mara is no civil rights attorney, never has been, never will be. But the white media is bestowing that title on him anyway. And have you noticed that in these articles they don't mention George Zimmerman anymore? Johnny Cochran defended O.J. Simpson one time, and from that day to the day he died, whenever they mentioned his name, attorney for O.J. Simpson was always right behind it. They didn't do that to Alan Dershowitz, Robert Shapiro, or even Robert Kardashian. White lawyers get the color pass. Black lawyers don't. The media has the power to be kingmakers. They shape reality. If they say you're a black leader, then you are, regardless of whether anyone is following you or not. If they say Trayvon Martin is on trial, then he is. And if they say a former white supremacist lawyer is now a civil rights attorney, then he is. Reality is whatever the white media says it is, regardless of if it contradicts what they said 3 years ago or even 3 seconds ago. You can't find any mention of O'Mara being a civil rights attorney prior to today. Even on his own website, he doesn't claim it. In none of his feculent interviews has he ever claimed it. Even now, he still doesn't call himself a civil rights attorney. But he doesn't have to. His fellow white supremacists in the media will do it for him. This way, when he decides that he wants to go back to fighting for the white supremacist again, he'll be able to claim that he never called himself a civil rights attorney, the same way he did when he was defending Zimmerman. O'Mara's just beginning the second act of his bottom-feeding career, and no doubt as he goes trolling for more black victims of white violence, he'll burnish his newly minted rep as a civil rights attorney. You just make sure that any time he or the white media tries it, that you call it for the lie it is.